Hey, what's up, coders? Today I wanted to cover a fun feature of CSS that you may or may not have heard of: CSS Variables. I was talking to a few developer friends this week, and I learned that not as many people had heard of them as I thought. So I wanted to do a quick little rundown about what they are, just in case you're in that boat too. Most languages have had variable support for a long time, but CSS never really had it out of the box. Our style sheets in CSS cascade, which has many inherent benefits already, but in cases of code reuse or dynamically computed element values based on some condition in your JavaScript, the cascade really might not be enough. Enter CSS Variables.
Huzzah!
If you've ever used compiled languages like SASS, you're probably familiar with variables in your style sheets already. CSS variables take things a bit further and allow you to use and set them in your code, retain their cascading ability like normal CSS, and they're static, meaning that once they're declared, they're a part of your style sheet and that's that, but dynamic enough to be changed without being reprocessed. With SASS variables, you really need to reprocess and recompile your styles to see any value changes. Alright, so enough talk. Let me show you how they actually work. To demonstrate the awesome power of CSS variables, we're going to be messing with this box right here. Inside of this outer box, which is a div with the class of color box, it's got a nice little nested div with the class of nested box. And that inner box has a background color of blue-violet. And when you hover over the outer square, you can see you get a nice little hover effect with this nice little drop shadow here. One of the things that I like to do when I'm using features like CSS variables, since they're not supported in 100% of browsers, I like to set up what's known as a feature query just to run my code inside of a query that feature is actually supported. The way that you do this is with the AtSupports CSS rule. And this at syntax might look familiar if you've ever used media queries before, because there's several at rules that you can use, but we're just going to use AtSupports for now, and we're going to set up a check for whether or not CSS variables are supported with --CSS variables. And we'll add our curly braces to run our code within this AtSupports check. So right now, we're going to grab the color box, the outer box on hover, and change that behavior of the nested box contained within it. So what we want to do is change the background color whenever you hover over the larger box. So that way you're not constricted to selecting just the small box on the inside to see the change. So let's go ahead and add a background of turquoise. If I can spell turquoise correctly, okay. I think that, nope. Missed a U. There you go. Sweet. All right, I'll go ahead and save this. And if you're not familiar with class selectors, that's what this period is. So class of color box on hover. And we're going to select the nested box within it to change that background color. So now we've saved this file. I'll go back to my browser and refresh. And when we hover over this box, we see that the background color changes of the inner box. So now that we know that CSS variables are supported in our browser, which we can see because this box turned a different color within our AtSupports feature query, We can either continue to write our code within the AtSupports feature query or write our code outside of it. For the sake of this tutorial, we're going to go ahead and write our code outside of it, just so you can see what each individual step is doing. So let's go ahead and delete the feature query and start with a clean slate. So now we're gonna actually set our first CSS variable on the root selector. And this is the root pseudo class, which basically allows you to select the root element of our document tree. Meaning in this case, since we're affecting HTML, we would be selecting the HTML element. But just FYI, the root pseudo selector has a higher specificity, as you can see here, than just directly selecting the HTML tag. So that's one of the reasons we're setting it on the root, just so our variables are available as globally as possible to any element we want to be able to actually use the variables. So we're going to go ahead and use that pseudo selector and create a new CSS variable with the -- syntax. And we're going to call it my new height. And we're going to use it to, well, you guessed it, set a new height. We're going to set that height to 25 pixels. And we're going to go ahead and save that. And then we're going to apply that variable to our color box's hover behavior once again. And we're going to apply it to that nested box so that we can change the height of the nested box to smaller than what it is now. As you can see, it's 75 pixels. So we're going to change it to 25 pixels when that big box is hovered over. So we'll set our height property, and to use that CSS variable, we need to call the VAR function. The VAR CSS function accepts the name of the variable or custom property, as they're also known, as an argument. So let's go ahead and pass our new height variable and save just to verify that it's working. And I'll go ahead and refresh my browser. And as you can see, the height of the inner box changes to 25 pixels when this outer box is hovered over. And as you can see, this is where our new height variable is applied to that root selector. The VAR function also accepts fallback values, just in case if for some reason your new height variable was set to something invalid. You could apply as many fallback values as you wanted to, like reiterating the 25 pixels, or you could set it to 0.5 rem, for instance, and you could just keep adding more fallbacks if you wanted to. That's entirely up to you. So for the sake of clarity, let's go ahead and delete those fallback values. All right. And just as a note, too, CSS variables can be set at the global level, or they can be locally scoped at the element level if you want to do that. That can come in handy if you want to, say, for instance, overwrite the global value for some reason at the element level, or if you just wanted one of your variables to be sectioned off within a particular element, which may come in use for things like theming, if you wanted to use variables in that context. To set a variable locally, just so you know what that looks like, you would set it under the individual element, just like we did with the root pseudo selector. And we're going to set it on our color box. We're going to overwrite our height variable with one that's actually a little bit taller instead. We'll go ahead and save that, refresh, and as you can see, the value gets overwritten because now the inner box is a little bit taller. If I want to define a new variable locally, it's the same thing. I'll go ahead and create a bigger variable that's going to adjust the scale of our big box to 1.2. Oops. So we apply that to the whole element, and then on hover, we'll go ahead and apply that scale to our transform property using the VAR function again and passing in bigger. And as you can see, the whole square gets bigger now. So let's go ahead and delete this other code. And I wanted to show you another really cool application for CSS variables. Internationalization is super useful since we're setting our variables at the global level. If you have users that speak French, Spanish, Arabic, English, you can alternate your variables dependent upon that as well too, which can really come in handy and save you any expensive JavaScript computation if you have like one particular value that you want to be set to something different in every single language. So think of it this way. We've got our root selector by default, and then also if we want to select when our root selector, meaning the HTML document, is in English specifically, we can create a title variable that's just set to the value of box. So either by default or in English specifically, our root language will be set to box. Let me remove that colon there. And then we're going to apply this title later to this title H1 here. But first, let's go ahead and duplicate this for the other languages that we want to make sure we can cover. Duplicate that 3 more times, and we'll go ahead and clear out those other values, and we'll set up Spanish first, and then some nice little French and Arabic. So for Spanish, we've got our box, which will the title will display caja. So for French, we'll go ahead and set the title of box to the French equivalent, which is boîte, spelled like B-O. And if you want to get the special character over the I, which is looks like a little triangle, you would hold down the Option key, which is Alt, and then hit the letter I to get that special character, and then hit release the Option key, and then hit the letter I again to add that accent over it, and add a T and an E, so that's boîte. And then in Arabic, since my keyboard's not set up for Arabic, I'll just go ahead and paste the equivalent there. Like so. Sanduquan. And let's go ahead and save and check to see if our title shows up. Doesn't show up because we haven't applied it yet. So where should we apply that? We've got obviously our h1 with a class of title. In order to apply these the CSS variable of title, we want to select the last element within the title and apply it after that. So we do that with the title class. We're going to select the pseudo after element, which is basically the last child of this title element. And we're going to apply the variable to the content property. Once again, using var and passing in our title. Let's go ahead and save, refresh, and then boom, there's our English title. If we scroll up in our index.html file, we see that our document has a language of English. Let's go ahead and verify that the other languages are working. Let's go ahead and change this to Spanish. Refresh. As we can see, it translates it to Spanish. Let's test it in French. What? And Arabic, just to see if it's working from right to left. And there we go. So let's go ahead and delete this title code and reset back to the default of English in our document. And I wanted to show y'all another application that's super powerful in terms of using CSS variables is being able to interact with your JavaScript. So first thing we want to do is set some dynamically computed values here. So what we want to do is take our color box and we want to set an X position that we're going to use to move the box to. So we've got our X position, and let's go ahead and set a Y position as well so we can move it in both directions. So we've initialized both variables to 0, and now when you hover over the box, let's go ahead, and transform to those positions. So let's set our transform to use the X position. And the Y position. And since they're set to 0 right now, obviously they're not going to go anywhere. But we can just verify that everything is configured correctly here before we do anything else in our JavaScript. So let's go ahead and save that. And make sure we wrap this in a translate function. So that way the values are getting used in the X for the translate and the Y for the translate. Save that. We'll go ahead and refresh our document. When we hover over, as we can see, it doesn't go anywhere, but we do see those variables initialized. And now let's pop over to our JavaScript and see what we can do with those values. So first, let's go ahead and create a variable to select that color box. So we're going to use the query selector from our document. And we're going to select that color box class, and query selector will just select the first element. So otherwise you could use, if you had many of these boxes, you could use, obviously get elements by class name or something. But since we're just selecting one element, I'll go ahead and do this. And then just to verify that we can actually, that everything's configured correctly on our JavaScript side, let's go ahead and just select that individual property. And the way that you do that in JavaScript is you use, obviously, the selector, and you would use the getPropertyValue method that's attached to the style object. What does that mean? So this is our element. After that, we have our style. So it's kind of like if you wanted to set a style like display or something, you could do that. But there are also methods attached to that style object that you can also use, like getPropertyValue, which will allow us to get the value of that CSS property or CSS variable. So let's go ahead and duplicate this for the Y value. So we got our Y position. So this is the way to use the method off of the style object. Just in case you wanted to do it a different way, there is also a global method to do it as well with getComputedStyle. And you pass in, obviously, the element that you want to get that property value, that custom property value from. So that would be the X position and the Y position. So these are both the same thing, essentially, or perform the same functionality. It just matters if you want to use the global, there you go, the global function, or if you want to use it off of the style object. So now that we know what those do, I'll go ahead and just select these two, comment these two out, since it's redundant and they both do the same thing. And I'm going to go ahead and set a console log to log the value of those. Oops. And let's go ahead and set that to Y. And remove our semicolons and replace them with commas. So this is going to log out an object with an X property set to the value of grabbing that X position, and the Y property mapped to that Y custom property or CSS variable. So let me go ahead and save this. Go to our console, and I will refresh. And there you go. Logs out an object with string values of nothing right now because it's set to 0. So now let's go ahead and actually set those values. So now, off of that style object, again, we're going to use a different method to set each individual property, which is appropriately named setProperty. And so the first argument it takes is the name of that custom property or CSS variable that you want to set, and the value as the second argument. So we want to select that X position variable and set it to the value of 100 pixels. I'll go ahead and copy this and duplicate it. And set this to the Y position. And just so we can verify that the value actually changes, let's go ahead and duplicate our log. And let's go ahead and save everything. Refresh. Let's head back to our CSS file and fix our little extra call to the VAR function. So that way our translate is taking in the X position, the Y position, and that's it. So let's go ahead and save that, refresh in our browser, and when we hover over this box, it should move if everything is wired up correctly. And there you go. So to recap, CSS variables are awesome and can be handy in many useful situations. They're just another great tool in your dev toolbox. If you have any ideas on other uses for CSS variables or you like the video, leave me a comment. I'd love to hear from you. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel if you want to make sure you don't miss out on any new videos. No matter what level you're at as a developer, don't forget, we all have to start somewhere. Talk soon.